Today we're going to talk about sourcing great investment opportunities. And then next week we're going to have property management, how to look after your tenants, how to get the best out of that relationship, and how to avoid tricky times with your tenants. So part of what we do with educating our investors is advising them on strategy, but also helping them source the stock that's going to fit their criteria. So once you've established that the client wants to retire at the age of 55 on £25,000 a year, having paid their mortgage off, we will then reverse engineer to find out the most appropriate property to achieve that goal. And what I try to encourage with an investor is don't get too specific or bent out of shape about I must do a HMO, or I must do rent to rent, or I must do buy to auction. Start with the end in mind, and then work out how much money you need, okay? And then you work out backwards the best strategy, which has to align with what you're prepared to be comfortable with. So there are some people that I know, some of our investors who, if I present them with a HMO, I know that they'll probably end up in a meltdown within 2 weeks because they just haven't got the type of personality that is consistent with managing a HMO, and that's absolutely fine. Maybe property investment isn't right for that person at all, and that's a conversation that we have very, very early on to establish, is this the right thing for you to be doing? And if it isn't, then I will direct you back to speak to a traditional financial advisor to help you navigate your retirement journey in that way, because there's no point trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, because property isn't without its challenges. You've got to be aware of it from the outset. There are other people who think that single-let properties are too boring. They're really gung-ho and aggressive. Let's go and do something really crazy, and that's fine too. We'll give you guidance along the way, but ultimately it's your investment decision. So part of that is working with suppliers. We distribute a variety of property opportunities which vary from new build properties which developers present to us, through to tenanted properties which have been in existence for a while, where there's a landlord with a whole portfolio who, for one reason or another, has decided that they want to dispose of some or all of their stock. Where we come into the equation is we research and due diligence the areas. So I know which parts of the United Kingdom I'm happy to recommend and which parts I'm not, and the reasons why. That's an ongoing process of maintaining healthy relationships with the local councils, the regeneration officers, the housing officers, having an acute awareness of what the transport links are like now, what they will be like in the future, how much regeneration money has been spent already, how much is on the horizon, schools, universities, hospitals, the big employers, what the crime rate's like, what are unemployment figures like, and looking at that whole picture will then determine where we start, and of course where we are within the 18-year property cycle as well. Okay, so all making sense so far? Cool. So obviously our suppliers then become a really important part of the whole process, and we don't have tens of suppliers. We probably have about 6 or 7 suppliers that we work with on a regular basis, and the reason for that is because I believe it's better to have fewer quality relationships than try to have 20 relationships which become a merry-go-round of chaos to try and maintain the relationships, particularly when it comes to property developers, because they are I guess my role is to try and humanise property developers, to make them realise that there is an end user, and they kind of might want to be nice to them at some point during the process, so that they might buy again. That's a difficult concept to get across to some people, but if I think I've got there on a few occasions, so hopefully we're doing something right. So our guest speaker today is Paul Stapleton from Belcroft Estates. I've been working with Paul for a while now. We've got a really good working relationship, and Paul is my go-to for tenanted stock. Sometimes there are new developments, and I think we're going to be doing more of that in the future, Paul. But so far we've worked with Paul on on a number of developments. I think we're going to touch on some of them today. And I just thought it'd be really useful for you guys today to hear from Paul about, his strategy, a bit about him, a bit about Belcroft, the sort of properties that they look for and the reasons why. Hopefully that will be something which resonates with you guys. So I've just unmuted Paul. Just a reminder, please ask lots of questions today. I want you to leave this masterclass having learned, taken away something of value to you. We will have a follow-up afterwards. So what we'll do is we'll email all of you, send you our brochure, and we'll invite you to have either a phone call or a Zoom with myself, just to talk about anything property related. We can be of any assistance to you, either now or in the future. We're a resource, use us. Hi Paul, how are you?
Yeah, good, thanks Gav. You?
Yeah, all good. And thanks for agreeing to be our special guest speaker at this week's masterclass.
No problem. No problem.
So I hope I've done you justice with my introduction there, Paul.
I think you left a few bits out, but we'll probably cover that anyway.
I didn't want to steal your thunder.
Hi everyone, hope you're all right. So as Gavin said, I'm from a company called Belcroft Investor Hub. We're based up in Bank in central London, and we act as a similar company to Gavin, but more importantly, as Gavin said, a supplier of good quality investment stock to a number of investment houses. So Gav, where would you like us to start really?
You've been working in property for a while now, haven't you? Do you want to talk a bit about your background and how you kind of got to being in a position where you're so knowledgeable about the market? Because I'm not being funny, you're about half my age and you know a huge amount. So I think some of the people here might be interested to learn how you got to where you are now.
Yeah. So I've been in property for around 10 years now. The first, I'd say 4 to 5 years of that were in the commercial sector. So sourcing hotels, land, anything such as garages, parking spaces, the commercial side of things for investors. And I kind of got to a point where I needed a new challenge. So went into residential. I think it's the opposite way that most people go. I think they start in residential and move into commercial. But I think that helped coming into residential with a commercial mind, because with a commercial deal, there's just no standard deal. Every deal is different. Every single deal has different terms. And I think it's allowed us to have a much broader idea of how properties can work for us and investors, as opposed to, as Gavin mentioned, sometimes the single let route doesn't work for that person, and we have a good way of maybe assessing properties so that they could work for a number of different investors. Belcroft Investor Hub, we've been around now it's coming into our 3rd year. And as I said, we've built the business on being one of the top suppliers in the UK for investment houses. We work with social landlords, investment trusts, and also similar companies to Gavin, estate and wealth management companies as well. We don't really do bespoke sourcing, so it's more we know what kind of stock works, and if that works for any of our partners, then fantastic. And that's based upon our years of investing ourselves, knowing what does and what doesn't work, and what we would invest in, we'd feel comfortable investors investing into, if that makes sense. Yeah,
absolutely. So what kind of properties do you look for, and given the current climate as well, give us some examples about what your criteria is?
Yeah, so a bit similar to yours, Gavin, where you said you start from the end and you work your way back. So for us, it's not about finding a deal that stacks financially. It's about finding an area that has significant regeneration that's going to be happening, high rental demand, employment growth. And once we find that area, then we concentrate on finding the stock in the correct area. So we look for a few little pockets of areas that we feel are underexposed property hotspots. So we're not really looking in your town centres where there's an abundance of high-rise towers going up and lots of competition. We're looking at the more sort of rural and suburban areas that are going to be sort of regenerated in the next 5 to 10 years. So as a long-term investor, you're getting in just before obviously the upturn in the market.
That's right. I think what's quite interesting, I think in property circles, we quite often get approached by potential investors who ask us for they want, you know, city centre locations. I think we all hear that quite regularly. You know, Leeds, Liverpool, Manchester, and Birmingham. I do find it quite interesting when we get asked for freehold properties in city centres of that nature, because they're quite, you know, the nature of those cities is that the majority are apartments. You don't tend to find too many 3-bedroom semi-detached houses in Birmingham city centre, do you?
No, not really, unless it's sandwiched between like a Pret and a Weatherspoons or something in the high street. But no, I think where the city centres are so built up, you've just got a huge amount of competition when it comes to the rental market, and also have to look at the resale market as well. Obviously, with investors, we're in it for the long term, and it's not about making that one sale and not worrying about their exit strategy. So if we're providing our clients into accommodation where there's 300 other apartments all going onto the rental market at the same time, the only way to stand out is probably to offer a cheap rent. And for us, that's not really going to be the most profitable way of our investors investing their money currently. Same as when you go to resell, there's 300 apartments in one block, then again, I'm sure you've experienced, Gavin, that can be a huge amount of competition when it comes to selling. And again, you're going to have to make your property look a lot more attractive price-wise. So we're dealing with the sort of 10-15 minute areas just outside of the town, outside of the city centres.
You know what, I think it's going to become even more relevant now, because I think one thing that we've all learned since we've been in lockdown is that how much time we used to waste travelling. And I have a feeling that we're going to see more people prepared to live on the outskirts of cities rather than in the city centres themselves. Mm-hmm. So what I think is going to happen is we're going to see a lot of temporary workers residing in city centres, so more kind of maybe more service accommodation in the city centres, people who are working there Monday to Friday, then going back to wherever they live at the weekends, and also from the perspective, I think, Paul, I think your model is very similar to ours, that, you know, we're not just about helping people buy properties, but we're going to be on their journey with them for a number of years. There may come a time when they need, for one reason or another, to dispose of a property that they purchased through us. And it's quite nice for them to know that one option that they do have is to come back to us and see if we can move that property on for them, because they've already got a relationship with us. Mm-hmm. Now, I would feel far more comfortable moving a property on if I know that we're 10-15 minutes outside of the city centre, and the 3-bed semi-detached house that we procured for that investor is situated within spitting distance of 3 schools that have outstanding or good Ofsted ratings. Mm-hmm. Because there'll be numerous reasons why we can then move that particular property on, regardless of what's happening in the city centre. So it's just about having a bit of a 360-degree approach to the investment strategy, and realising that it's not just the initial purchase, it's thinking long term there as well, which is why I think that we're on the right track here by offering properties in those areas on the outskirts.
And it's obviously the type of property as well that you're buying in those areas. So for us, 2 and 3 bedroom freehold houses are always going to be the most popular properties for rental and for resale. You're going to attract longer term tenants. So if you opt for an apartment, I'd say you're going to be attracting younger working professionals who are at the start of their journey. They meet someone, they get a bigger flat, they have kids, they move out of the flat. Whereas with a house, you're more likely to find a family that will want to build a home as opposed to just use it as a stepping stone. So you've got a much longer term tenant, which in turn will make sure hopefully that you have minimal rent voids, because it's not going to be vacant while you're looking for new tenants. But I think more importantly as well, knowing that you've got a tenant in there that's going to be looking after the property is one of the most important things as well.
I think you're absolutely right. I think if you have a long-term tenant, I think the other thing is with 3-bed, 2-bed houses, we always distribute those as an unfurnished product. And that makes a big difference, because in the city centres, generally you have to furnish them to attract the more transient tenant. Whereas in the suburbs, if you get if you're promoting a property which is unfurnished, if anyone who brings their own furniture with them into a property is far more likely to treat that property like their own home than they would if furniture has been provided. It's psychological. And if they're going to be there, they've got a couple of kids and there's an academy down the road which looks, which accommodates children aged 3 to 16, then they could be there for a decade. And they will be your eyes and ears on that property, letting you know there's anything wrong, anything that needs to be done. And there's a longer period of time for your chosen professional letting agent to establish a good relationship with that tenant, so that they don't see the letting agent inspections as something to dread, but an opportunity to look forward to, so that they can share their thoughts on the condition of the property to that letting agent, who can then feed that back to the landlord.
Yeah. And I think, sort of just touching on location as well, it's crucial to understand the location so that you understand the type of tenant that you're going to attract as well.
Can you give us some examples of that, Paul? Good and bad. Actually, I'd be interested to look at both.
Yeah, well, I think from a mortgage point of view, I think anything that's close to the shops and the pubs and places like that, you're gonna, and maybe even a park directly in front of you or behind you, as nice as it is to have that as something to look at, that's obviously where there's a lot of gatherings, there's a lot of trouble, and we always tend to avoid that. We like a park in the immediate area, but not the sort of immediate vicinity of the property. I think it's the style of shops as well that are there as well. So for us, if you've got big supermarkets and everything like that, it's great. When you've got a tired high street with tired shops, that tends to bring the rental prices down in that area. And the cheaper the rental prices, the more difficult maybe the kind of tenants would be that you attract. So a lot of the properties that we provided to Gavin have been properties in good areas that are achieving above average rents. And I think the higher the rent in the area, above the average, it's going to attract the highest caliber of tenant within that area as well, which I think is really crucial for your property.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that, Paul, as well. The things that you don't necessarily want to see within the direct vicinity of your property is a parade of shops, which are Ladbrokes, the dry cleaners and the kebab shop. It's perhaps not going to be something which is going to attract the best caliber of tenant. And moreover, the mortgage lenders will be pissed off by that too. That's worth mentioning.
Yeah, which even though you might be able to get a mortgage yourself at the front end, again, are you limiting the resaleability of that property as well on the back end? Potential buyers not being able to get a mortgage because their financial position isn't ideal. So again, that's all things to consider. The main things that we look at location wise, so as Gavin mentioned, schools are one of the most important things we look at, because we're obviously looking at attracting family tenants. We look for things like leisure centres, hospitals, transport links, supermarkets. We put ourselves in the eyes of the tenant, and if I was a tenant in that area, what amenities would I like to see? And again, that's the difference between your property not even needing to go onto the portals to be rented out, and there being a long waiting list of people that have said, if you get any properties in this area, then get in touch with us. And I would say the properties that we have always rented out really, really quickly at the highest prices.
Yeah, absolutely. So talking about specific areas, what parts of the Midlands and the North are you particularly excited by at the moment, and
Yeah.
why?
So Liverpool is an area that we're quite excited about, and not again not the city centre, but we feel Liverpool is maybe 5 years behind Manchester. Manchester's becoming more and more difficult to find well. Uh, I don't want to say deals. There's always deals out there, but the deals that we would look for our investors, good quality deals. Um, Liverpool being 5 years behind it makes it the ideal time to get involved in that area. You've got places like the Everton Valley that's got a huge amount of regeneration going on, new football stadium. With that will bring new transport links, shops. National developers are looking to build there, and that will bring a lot more employment growth to the area, builds up the economic growth, and all things like that impact upon the rental demand and the rental values, and more importantly, the property values. So Liverpool is an area we're looking at. We really like Sheffield. Again, Sheffield is a university town. We don't tend to look at properties for students, but there are some great deals to be had in Sheffield. And also Lincolnshire. Lincolnshire has been on our radar for a few years now, and we converted Gavin to Lincolnshire last year. You've got a huge amount of big corporate companies moving their head offices to Lincolnshire because there's so much farmland there. And obviously where the UK have been importing for years and years, that farmland is primed to be developed on for large industrial parks. So you've got companies like Siemens moving their head offices there, Hilton Group. You've got Amazon warehouses being moved there as well. And that brings a huge amount of employment growth. So we've done a number of sites in Lincolnshire with Hawkhurst lately. And I would say 80% of the 80% of the tenants are working for sort of the agricultural industry and also Amazon. And what we've seen is that they haven't been affected by obviously the whole sort of lockdown coronavirus, because where we're not importing into the UK fruit and veg market has increased. So they've actually been looking for more fruit and vegetable pickers. Amazon has just gone through the roof, so everyone that's working at Amazon has been kept in jobs. And it's the big corporate companies that we're looking at. If they're moving there, they're moving there for a reason, not because it's cheap rent, but they're moving there because they see a huge amount of potential in that area. And when they do move there, they usually have to provide something to the area as well. So it might be something to do with the transport links and anything to do with the infrastructure.
Absolutely. Just to kind of reinforce that point, I think so. In near Liverpool, I mean, one area that I've always been a big fan of from an investment perspective is Wigan, and indeed Warrington. Wigan's situated pretty much part way between Liverpool and Manchester, isn't it, Paul? So that
I think it comes under as Greater Manchester.
It does, yeah. But it's not far. I mean, even the accent starts to edge its way towards Liverpool in Wigan as well. So, but the tenancies are so strong. As soon as one tenant leaves, you've got another one pretty much lined up straight away.
Yeah,
really strong. And I've noticed that. Sorry, Paul, after you.
We had a great site with you in Wigan, and when we were looking at the property, the thing about Wigan is that everything is leasehold. So most of the properties are owned by the council, and the council will issue leases. And from an investor point of view, a freehold is always going to be more valuable. And from a mortgage point of view, you've got a lot more products and better rates open to you by a property being freehold as well. And we were able to actually negotiate the freehold from a developer on a 2-year-old site of houses that we found, and straight away that it's going to make those properties extremely attractive on the resale market when Gavin's investors do look to sell. But more importantly, the properties were achieving £150 more than any other property in the area that's comparable. They were 2-bedroom, 2-year-old houses, achieving £100 more than a 3-bed in the area and £150 more than a 2-bed. And it's down to the quality of them. And from spending a day up there, you also see the difference in quality of the type of tenant, because they're paying the higher rent in that property in comparison to the surrounding streets as well. So it's really important, I think, to know the area as well.
I think that's important as well, is the creativity that's necessary to get these deals. So part of your role, Paul, was to convince the owner of those properties to make them freehold. And in the north of England, a lot of property owners don't understand why us in the south of England find the prospect of a leasehold house so daunting. We as a company would never sell a leasehold house. And the main reason for that is because they're difficult to mortgage now. The government issued a white paper a few years ago where developers are no longer allowed to build leasehold houses. However, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of leasehold houses still across the UK, and there has to be a mortgage market to help people move those on, but it's a narrow market. So by educating people up there to be flexible enough to accept freehold as an option, we're now bringing that sort of property to the marketplace, whereas beforehand that would have been something that we would have shied away from. So it's good to be creative with these things, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I mean, like, we had a discussion yesterday. So we negotiated a row of 10 houses that were built 10 years ago. Developer held on to them and has tenanted them out, and Gavin's been selling them. I think we're sort of just over halfway through the site, and we're looking at ways to offload the last few. And as Gavin said, it's all about being creative. So these are large 2-bedroom townhouses. They're over 1,000 square foot. And we've come up with 2 different strategies which open it up to 2 completely different type of buyers. One being to convert a downstairs garage into a 3rd bedroom, therefore add in 15 to 20,000. So it's a little development opportunity there. And the second is to convert it into a HMO. So to take it from a 2-bed into a 4-bed, which would be generating, I'd say, just over double what it would as a single let, but only cost you around £10,000 to make that change. So that's one property with 3 different potential buying types that we can offer it to. And as Gavin said, it's just about being creative and looking at everything in different lights to see how can we make money, how can we appeal to a much broader market. Well, not being a letting agent, it's quite hard for me to answer that one, but I think just by making sure the property initially that we have our clients purchase is just in an ideal area that will have high rental demand. And also, I think it's us assisting them in choosing the right letting agent in the area that can provide them with a very proactive service. But we're not a letting agent, so it's not something that I would typically deal with. I think that's next week's, isn't it, Gav?
It is. Although I mean, just my quick answer to that question is, it's all down to the quality of the referencing and checking from the outset. So first thing is the location a good one? Are there good reasons for why people would want to stay living there? And that's a massive part of our due diligence. Secondly, a good letting agent will credit check and reference properly. And before coronavirus, then you would have had the opportunity to take out rent guarantee insurance to make sure that was all safe and sound. But ultimately, as long as you've got good employers in the area, and you've got good credit checks and references, then you shouldn't have any real problems with your tenants. And with the voids, It's all about making sure that your letting agent is working with the situation to make sure that they know in advance when that tenant's moving out, and they're swift and quick. I mean, a good letting agent will have a waiting list of people who have already in contact with them saying, listen, I'm looking out for a 2-bed house in Boston, what have you got coming up? And they'll know, because they will know when all those tenancy agreements are due to expire. They will be on that letting agent's radar if they're any good a letting agent. And then they will say that these are the potentials. Hopefully they'll be renewing, but if they don't, we've got some properties lined up here. And it's just making sure that that's a consistent behaviour pattern that the letting agent is doing. So hopefully, another thing I would say also, just in terms of being a responsible and cautious investor, is always make sure you've got 6 months fixed outgoings per property in the bank for a rainy day. Because I'd rather wait for a little bit to get the right tenant in than rush and get the wrong one in.
So I'll usually spend a day or two in the area. I'll do a mile radius walk, getting to know the area, where all the amenities are, so I can pinpoint them on a map for our clients when we pass to Gavin as well. But what we've started doing, which we started providing that to Gavin, is once we find the letting agent that we think is suitable for our clients, we can do like an intro video and almost like an interview with them that's then passed on to the investors as well. Obviously, it's their discretion if they choose to go ahead with them, but a lot of clients will really value that we've done all of that hard work for them, because they just don't have the time. But it's been quite good, hasn't it, Gavin? The investors quite like that video. And the great thing as well is if the current letting agent, because the majority of properties that we're able to get tenanted, the current agent is good. It's also great that they have that relationship with the current tenant, and that's why and they know the property, because the properties that we tend to provide to Gavin aren't individual properties in an area, it's a whole block of houses. So when they've been on that site for the last 5 years, they almost know the tenants inside out. If Gavin fires a few questions over to me, you can quickly find out if they're the right people for us, because they come back to us within 5 minutes with the answers. And that's the kind of letting agent that we put forward. But again, we fully vet them as much as we vet the property.
Yeah, I think Boston's a really good example of that, Paul.
Yeah.
You know, the letting agent there, when you've got somebody who's born and bred Boston in this particular circumstance, that they've grown up there, they know every inch of the town. It's so reassuring. If I ever, I know I can send anybody up to Boston to view any of the properties that we've got there in total confidence that, first of all, they're going to receive a very warm welcome from such a professional organisation. But secondly, the amount of knowledge that they have about about the town and what parts of the town are key. I mean, the houses in Boston, which we're selling at the moment, one of the biggest attractions there, for example, was the fact that there aren't many houses in Boston town centre itself. It's mainly apartments. So to have freehold houses in the town centre was a real rarity. And lo and behold, they're rented out very easily, aren't they, Paul?
With parking spaces as well.
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
Was more rare than the houses were, to have houses with private gated parking to the rear as well. And that's been the biggest selling points for the rental market there, and actually probably achieving an extra £50 a month just for the parking space.
Hence why it's no drama to convert the garage into a living room.
Yeah, exactly.
We touched upon coronavirus. What are your thoughts on the UK property market and the Midlands and North in particular compared to the South with what's going on at the moment? What have you been hearing and what do you think is going to happen?
My reaction to the market has been that if you give in to the hearsay, then the hearsay will become true. So a lot of people are saying that it's that the market's going to start falling, and I think it will start falling if people stop buying. I think all the time the market's active, people are buying, people are selling, then there's no reason for the market to dip. I think with the areas that we're looking at, where properties are going for anywhere between 80 to 150,000, I think if there is a fall in prices, then they're not going to be huge, and that they'll be made back pretty quickly. I think the areas hit hardest are going to be obviously the south, London, within the M25, and a couple percent off of the prices down here is quite large, whereas a couple of percent off the property prices in the areas that we're speaking about are quite minimal. One positive thing to say is that we've had surveys that have taken place in the last 2 weeks, and they valued at the same price as pre-coronavirus prices, which I think if anyone's going to be more cautious, it's going to be the lenders and the surveyors. So the fact that the properties and the areas that we're selling properties in haven't downvalued over that period, I think is a good thing.
I think I'd agree with that as well, Paul. I think the rental market will remain strong because a lot of first-time buyers, it's hard enough for a first-time buyer to get on the property ladder at the moment, in my view. This situation's probably made it an awful lot worse. So I think a lot of youngsters who have had plans to buy their first home this year might be renting for a while longer, which obviously works well for the property investor who's hoping to rent out to
repossessions as well that have gone on over this period as well, which has forced more families to unfortunately move into rented accommodation. But I think I get a lot of people messaging me on LinkedIn and asking for heavily discounted property. And I see a lot of that on LinkedIn as well, that it's a buyer's market, but I kind of disagree with that, because I don't think it's a buyer's market and I don't think it's a seller's market right now. I think we're just in a normal market. I don't see any people panic selling right now, and they're in a position where they have to sell and sell it at a massive discount. And if they are selling it at a huge discount, you'll probably find out post completion why it was sold at a big discount. At the same time, yes, there's buyers out there, but a lot of them have been cautious. They're not wanting to pay full market value. But I've also seen a lot of sellers that are adamant on sticking to the guns and not dropping their prices. They've got tenants in the property, and all the time their mortgages are being paid, they have absolutely no reason to drop the prices, and they're happy to sit on it for another month, 2 months, 3 months and ride it out, because nobody knows what's going to happen. So there's no point panic selling. So I think for us, it's business as normal. We're not saying it's a buyer's market. We're not saying it's a seller's market. It's as it was beforehand, really.
Thank you, Paul. That's really useful. I think I agree with that. It all depends upon the financial position of the person that's selling. If they've got good tenants paying their rent on time, then they'll ride out the storm and wait till things are picked up before they decide to sell again, if they're not paying what they need for that property.